Welcome here, everyone, this afternoon to the Centre for Social Justice. It is standing room only, and so it should be. We are covering one of the major topics of our time. I'm Andy Cook, the Chief Executive here, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all here and everyone who's watching online. Now, my wife always tells me off. I'm going to pause there because she tells me off quite a lot. When in a rare moment, when one of our three children do something exceptional, I instantly tell them that they're my favourite child. Apparently it does nothing for the self-esteem of the other two. But in learning from my wife this afternoon, I have to say that now in my 9th year at the Centre for Social Justice, having seen us deliver hundreds of reports and drive loads of impact, the work presented today is not my favourite, but I certainly think that it is unique among all others. It's capturing something critical that is stirring in this nation. The tagline that we use here at the Centre for Social Justice is that we connect the backstreets of this nation with the corridors of power. And what we really mean by that is we go out and listen to what real people are talking about and try and bring those conversations back, those cries for help back, and bring it into a Westminster village that so often is tin-eared and focusing in a different direction. And more than ever, as we've gone out across this country in our regional offices, as we've taken hundreds of interviews and case studies and all the rest, we've heard one rumbling cry from people, and that is about what on earth is happening to this nation's boys. This, of course, is not a new thing. 20 years ago, I founded a charity on an estate I was living because I met two lads, Ash and Terry, where I saw that unless something changed in their lives and in them, they'd end up where their older brothers had, and that was frankly on the scrap heap. Luckily, we helped them, but in helping Ash and Terry and meeting hundreds of other boys and girls like them, I came to see that in them there was some similar traits going on. Dads had gone AWOL, schools had kicked them out, and the welfare setup had meant it was easier to do everything else other than work. And all this had led to their incredible talents being wasted. But fast forward to now, and the report that we're looking at today highlights how the Ash and Terry of my day not only seem to have multiplied in number, but seems to have become more entrenched. And this report aims to spark the discussion on why. Thank you to everyone in this room who've helped us do this. It's not easy work, and we're bound to unwillingly upset some people, maybe willingly upset some others. To those that have funded it, thank you. To the small charities of which this room is full of, thank you. And also to those on this panel who yet again have stuck their neck out to make this discussion happen. We are very, very grateful. I want to thank particularly Miriam Cates, unrivaled in this village for getting things out there, and the Samwise Ganji of the operation, Luke, down here, who's carried the whole load in doing this. We're going to hear from Luke very shortly, and then a brave young man, Charlie, to tell his story, and then we're going to gain responses from the panel and open up for questions. And we'll have Andy Burnham joining us at 2 o'clock if his buses run on time that he's now in control of. To finish, before going over to Luke, despite us hearing, and we're about to hear some really difficult statistics, and we hear tragic stories and statistics every day at the CSJ, I want to say that this is not a council of despair. Despite the work we do, I think the CSJ is one of the most joyful places in Westminster. This place and the MOG, which is over the road, which we can all join us at after. And that's because no matter the problems that we see, and we see a lot, we always meet people that are overcoming them. And this room is full of those people. And you're who we take inspiration from. So this is about opening up a discussion. The paper is, we're going to do loads more papers on this after where we're looking for ideas, and we need you more than ever. That's it from me for now. Luke, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. I'm a researcher here at the CSJ. My name's Luke. The Lost Boys report has not actually sought to answer the question why things are going wrong. It's also not tried to come up with any recommendations. Instead, this report stands as the beginning of our work, answering simply one question: what's going wrong for boys in Britain? Our research over the past few months has spanned the UK. We've spoken to charities, teachers, parents, young women, and lots of young men. And I personally am really pleased that lots of whom we've spoken to are actually with us in the room today. The report focuses on 6 main areas, each of which covers some of the key challenges facing young men and boys. So without further ado, number 1, employment. Well over 500,000 young men are now classified as not in education, employment, or training. That's 1 in 7 young men of that age group. Since COVID, this number has risen by 40%, and in the same time frame, it went up by just 7% for women. The report also recognises how average young woman in full-time work now earns 10% more than the average young man. Number 2, education. Boys are behind from nursery all the way to university. One of this government's milestones is to have 75% of kids school ready. Currently, the girls are passing at rates of 75%, but it's the boys who are behind on just 60%. And this continues in SATs and GCSEs and A-levels and T-levels all the way to university admissions. Girls are significantly ahead of boys. The graph on the right as well shows how boys are over twice as likely to be included in the growing number of school exclusions, and it's particularly stark for boys who are on free school meals, that top line. Number 3, health. 3/4 of those who take their own lives in this country are men. It's the biggest killer for men under the age of 50. The morbid graph highlights the extent of this problem across all the different age groups. Apart from this, we've explored in the report things like ADHD diagnosis, to childhood obesity, to steroid use, where boys as young as 13 are now using image-enhancing steroids, completely oblivious to the obvious health risks. Number 4, crime. The numbers on the screen show the percentage of these areas that are made up by men and boys. Last year, there were 529 boys in the youth estate, and there were only 11 girls. And as of yesterday, there will officially be no girls at all in the youth estate. With criminal exploitation, violent offences, and knife crime in mind, 89, 90, and 91% of the victims of these huge societal challenges were boys. Number 5, technology and porn. Alongside things like the role of artificial intelligence and gaming disorders, our report has highlighted the average age of first seeing pornography is 13, and we have strong reason to believe this is actually younger for boys. And this goes alongside studies which show that 88% of all pornographic videos contain aggression and abuse, and 96% of the time, the women, who were almost always the targets of this aggression, expressed pleasure at the abuse. And sextortion, this is a form of blackmail where criminals threaten to share a victim's sexual images or pictures. 91% of those who were targeted were boys, and the average age of these boys was somewhere between 14 and 17. In the first 6 months of 2023, rates of sextortion increased by 250% than the entire year beforehand. And 6, families and fatherlessness. There is a crisis of masculinity in this country, and a major part of this starts in the home, where 2.5 million children are now growing up without a father. On all the visits we've done, 9 out of 10 of them mention the rising role of men like Andrew Tate. But Andrew Tate isn't the cause of the problem, he's just a symptom of it. And our focus on the issue of fatherlessness is particularly supported by young men, with 2/3 of them believing that fatherlessness is a principal cause for the behavioural challenges facing children and young adults. And this was only supported by half of the general population. So the national picture is fairly bleak, but there is cause for hope. This is just the first stage of the report, and over the next year or two, we'll be coming up with policy solutions that can help alleviate some of these challenges. And we'll be working alongside charities who, like Andy mentioned, are already working and really doing great work in so many of these spaces. I'm now going to invite up Charlie, who we met through a charity in Essex called Lads Needs Dads, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his story.
Okay, thank you, Luke. I'm just here to talk a little bit about me today. Growing up wasn't easy for me. My mum passed away when I was 2, and my dad didn't deal with it very well. It was just me and my brother. Um, and unfortunately, just before I turned 13, my dad passed away. Um, and it was a really hard time for me. I felt quite lost and isolated, having no males in my life to kind of support me in that role. So I felt, well, quite isolated. And I didn't really see a way out. My mental health started to decline. I didn't see a reason for me to be standing up anymore, to kind of carry on, and I was struggling a lot. And then luckily, just at the right time, Sonia and Lasney's dads came in, and yeah, they helped me get through it all. And I think without them today, I think I wouldn't be standing here. Um, it was quite tough, not just at the start, but throughout. It didn't get better overnight. I think that without that support, like I said, I wouldn't be here, and I just feel bad for everyone else in the country who just isn't able to get that support. I find it myself quite hard to imagine what they must be going through without such support in their lives. Um, and I think it's an issue that goes under the radar in a lot of cases. It's a recurring issue, but not brung up, which is strange because we see it everywhere. It's the link between so many other problems in our society, and I think with more awareness and support for young boys, I think we'll really be heading in the right direction. And not just me, but so many other boys that I know that went through the program with me. They've gone the other direction with their lives in a good way. I've seen people who maybe would end up quite violent or whatever wrong way you can imagine. I've seen them go the other way, and I think it wasn't until a year or two ago when I looked back at my time with Lasney's dads and I realised the support that I've got, and I think that is when I knew that I had to help as well, that I need this what I wanted to do. And now I'm now mentoring at Lasney's dads, helping out young boys, and it's amazing to see what they're like and how I can help them progress through as well. I mean, when I was at Lasney's dad's, we done a cooking evening for mums and carers, and I saw it as a bit of fun, bit of cooking, even though I was no good at it. And then just towards the end of last year, I was then helping out the younger lads with other mentors do the cooking, and I still wasn't any good at it. But the real thing that caught me was being on the other side of that and seeing the mums' reactions, which I hadn't noticed when I was younger. I saw how grateful they were in their eyes, and the lads, the connection there really makes it all worth it. And I think that needs to be seen everywhere, really. And yeah, that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well done, mate. Absolutely. This is why there's great hope out there. People like you. It's fantastic, Charlie. Right. We're going to go to our esteemed panel for some reflections, and then we're going to go out and ask for you guys to have any questions, etc. Sonia, you set up Lads Need. This is your chance to absolutely show what an incredible thing you've done, which it is an incredible thing. Sonia, what's your reflection, particularly on some of the areas about fatherlessness, about this male, this key male kind of mentor, role model, etc.? Tell us your story.
Okay, I could speak on this like till next week. So
Let's just keep it to 3 minutes.
That's it. I've prepared a really short reflection to keep me focused, okay? So I wanted to start by asking you just to think about a boy. We could think about Charlie, but picture a boy full of potential, because I see when boys come to us, I look for that potential. I look for the gold in them, yeah? But inside, they're carrying a real weight, which they just don't know how to share. They're struggling in silence because the desire for a father's presence and that guidance and that connection, it remains, even when it's gone. It remains. Even if he was a really difficult father, it still is there. And I see fatherless boys as the most high-risk and overlooked groups in our society. I really do. When a father's not in a boy's life, for whatever that reason, it leaves a void. And that void doesn't just disappear. It's carried with them, and it can manifest in mental health struggles, behavioural issues, academic disengagement, and even lead them down dangerous paths. And the reasons for a father's absence are quite varied. You may think, you know, what is an absent dad? And actually, we've come across so many types of absence. 35% of the boys that come to us, their fathers have died. And you often don't think about absence as death, but that is the case. It was the case in Charlie's case. Others have lost contact due to parental separation. You know, it's faded over time, and also because contact has been restricted because there may have been abuse or things in the home. You know, and some fathers have made mistakes, and some just aren't prepared for fatherhood. You know, maybe they didn't want to be a dad at that particular time. But the ones that really get me are the ones that have never met their fathers. They don't know who they are. They've never looked them in the eye, and they have that ache inside them that doesn't get expressed maybe in the way they'd like. It's quite a deep issue for me, this, because, you know, these are real lives we're talking about, these young men. They're not just statistics, are they? They're real people. And what I've found is even when the fathers have let them down and there's been pain, there's that longing, you know, that gets pushed downwards. And they often don't talk to their mums about it. They don't want to burden their mums with the fact they might miss their dad. What if dad, you know, didn't behave well and he left under bad circumstances, but they feel disloyal almost bringing it up. And those feelings get pushed down, and it impacts, you know, it impacts their mental health hugely. It can play out in the classroom, play out in the home, and in the criminal justice system. But I'm coming on to the positive bit now. It doesn't have to be this way. With early intervention, we can change the trajectory of these boys' lives. We can equip them with emotional literacy, which is a big key thing that we implement very early on, positive male role models, and the support that they desperately need. We can help them understand their struggles, and we can help schools and equip them to give them the tools they need to engage these young men before they become a statistic. So a father's absence, it leaves a void, but it doesn't have to define a boy's future. With the right support, guidance, and role models, we can help them find their strength, their direction, and their place in the world, because no boy should be left to navigate that journey alone. I hope that answered that.
Yeah, 3.2 minutes, absolutely perfect.
Oh, good, good.
Wonderful, thank you, Sonia. Lawrence, many of us men here would look at you and say you're the ultimate of a male. World Cup winner. But actually what you've also gone and done is set up one of the most amazing charities going, called Rugbyworks, which we're very proud to work with here. And that works in the school system. Lawrence, give us some reflections on how school is helping or not helping with some of the lads, and any of the wider points you want to make.
Yeah, thank you, and brilliantly said, Sonia. Good afternoon, everyone. Look, I grew up with an older sister, so I've always had a sort of set in what I call a relatively normal household, and I've always had a sense that boys are behind girls in many ways. I was had to be dragged kicking and screaming to the table to do homework and things like that. My sister said, "Don't worry, Dad, Mum, Lawrence will come good in the end." But with two daughters of my own now and a son who's the youngest, again, I've always had that sense. But I think when I read the report, and I have read the report, and I suggest that, you know, rather than just skim reading it, you actually read it. I was absolutely horrified at some of the statistics that exist nowadays in you know, with young boys. I'll just remind everyone, we all come into this world with nothing, and we all leave with nothing, and what we do in between is really quite important. And when I gave up rugby, I wanted to work with young boys and girls. So I set up Rugbyworks. We work with kids who are excluded from mainstream education. And they're not born bad, they're just born into chaos. You know, they're born into not wonderful, normal homes like yours and ours. And they, you know, there's either generational unemployment, there might be violent abuse, drug abuse, you know, separated homes, you know, parentlessness, whatever it might be. There's a whole raft of reasons why behaviours change in young people. And what we do is we work with them through rugby, but it could be football, could be cooking, could be anything really, liberal arts, and we take them on a journey really and help them to get into employment, sustained employment and education. I think one of the things, a statistic that really I was quite shocked by is we all struggled a little bit during the pandemic, some more than others. Our schools shut down, you know, for young people that meant maybe the place that they feel safest actually shut down, and the communication between organisations like ours was very, very difficult because of various GDPR rules and regulations. We couldn't actually get in touch with the young people. Imagine what that felt like for them 3 years later when schools reopened. You know, for young boys for 40% of them to not be in employment, education or training from the age of, you know, when they leave school, versus 7%, you know, that, yes, I was behind my sister, you know, growing up, but it wasn't by 33%, let me tell you that now. And so I really do feel that the work that we do is life-changing. We get 87% of kids through our programme into full-time employment and education. But so there are solutions and alternatives work, but I think what the CSJ has done brilliantly and rather worryingly, and quite sadly, is shone a light on the statistics now, and you know, and the government need to read it as much as I've read it, because I'm sure they've got boys at home, some of those people that will make these decisions, and understand what the implications are. So today is about highlighting the problems that exist, and we'll get onto the solutions later on in the summer.
Thank you, Lawrence. Iain, if I can come to you next, because you founded the CSJ, obviously you changed welfare, etc. And one of the big problems we're seeing is in the work area for young men. Fascinating. The average age of a bricklayer now is 52. The average age of, I think, a welder is 48. There's this gap emerged between what was traditionally kind of masculine roles and those filling it. Iain, do you want to give your reflections on the report and take us into some of the workless area?
Well, I think this report is excellent. I think also that 16 years ago, about 4 years after we'd set up the CSJ, we did a report called Breakdown and Breakthrough Britain. And there was one section in there on family. There was another section on drugs and worklessness. And the very interesting thing about this is all these figures here were in that report. They're just a lot worse now. So what we could see back 16 years ago was all these problems about boys getting lost during the process in the system were already pretty bad. And when I was in charge of DWP, it's quite interesting. I used to go around and look at all the job centres, talk to all the people there. And they would say to me endlessly, because there were a lot of women working in the DWP, quite rightly, they're job advisors. But they would say you could always see the bloke that came in, who would come in because they were out of work. And then they would come and sit down, and then we'd say, right, great to see you, all the rest of it. Can we just fill this form in so that we get all your detail? And when we turned away, we looked back, he'd gone. And the reason he'd gone was because he was illiterate, because his school had completely failed him, and he'd left school early, very, very early, probably around about the age of 10 or 12, maybe 14. So reading a form and then filling it in was something he simply couldn't do. And because he couldn't do it, he therefore couldn't get involved in the jobs market, because everything needed his ability to be able to read and write. So he was shunted off into casual work or, ultimately, criminal work. And those are the jobs that were available for him. And it was fascinating to watch that. And then you look at schools, this is the other bit too. And the one thing I've noticed over the time that I've been in Parliament, visiting schools endlessly, is you will see that there are fewer and fewer of them have male teachers in them. Almost if I go to a primary school today, I mean, if there's a male teacher in there, they hang on like gold dust to him because the boys have got a role model in there, and many of them are coming from homes, as in this report, where they don't see a male role model who's doing positive work or inspiring them. And now go to secondary schools, and that drift is happening very similar. That's not to criticise in any way female teachers teaching, doing fantastic jobs, but for quite often what you'll find now is that loss of a role model is accentuated through the rest of the pathways in their lives. And so dealing with this isn't a knee-jerk process, and we come back to that later. It is understanding how little we've cared about this point. Prisons. I've added gambling to this note. If you look at who are the targets for the gambling industry to get them hooked on gambling late at night, it's boys. They try to bring every rule in, then they get them when they're young men. Women are not their target. It's the different way in which boys see things and men see things that is really the way they can get into them hooking. So all of this report's fantastic. I say to the government, and I'll say more about that if you want later on, the reality is you can look to save money on welfare, but if all you're going to do is cut welfare and not reform the changes and all the failures that came out of the lockdown, then you will end up ballooning again within 2 to 3 years because you won't have got to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is too many young boys and young men are lost because the system didn't care and we didn't really bother.
Thank you. Miriam, you've put all of this together brilliantly. You've been out fronting it. You may have seen her on your screens recently on this topic. Give us your reflections on it.
I just want to start by saying thank you to Luke, because actually Luke wrote the report. It's the first report he's ever done, and I think you'll agree he's done an absolutely incredible job. And obviously it's been a team effort, but Luke has very much put all the work in. So thank you, Luke. Super job and great presentation. It has been a real privilege to be part of this report, and I think it's been quite interesting the reaction that it's had in the media and the amount of coverage it's had. It's almost as if people have been waiting to be able to write about this, and what they've needed is a bit of encouragement, a bit of permission, and some reliable statistics. And hopefully, we've given that. But it is, it's a very shocking, saddening report to read. And I think the statistic, particularly about the NEETs, the boys not in education, employment, and training, are really worrying. Obviously, they're worrying for boys themselves. What are you supposed to do as a young man if you don't have a job, training, or employment? What is your purpose in life? What is your future? It's also incredibly frightening for society because, of course, young men traditionally have been the powerhouse, the energy house, the kind of the energy of society. And yet when that energy is focused negatively, when involved in crime or just stuck in your bedroom or become toxic, as the media like to say, that's a terrible thing for society. We cannot afford for men in the prime of their lives not to be contributing to our society and not to have a future. So it's a terrible thing for society as well as also for the young men. And I think the next stage of the report is going to be to ask what's happened and what can we do about it. But I think what we need to be very clear about first is to understand that men and women, boys and girls are different. And one of the things that's gone wrong over recent years is we've forgotten that. We've pretended that boys and girls are the same, that we can educate them the same, that it doesn't matter if they don't have a dad because a mum is just as good. And we've forgotten that actually boys don't turn into good men by accident. That has to be nurtured. And the innate talents and skills and characteristics that boys do have, that energy, that aggression, courageousness, competitiveness, those things become positive traits that are good for society if they are nurtured, particularly by men, particularly by fathers, but if they are understood during childhood that they need rough and tumble, that they need to be able to express their competitiveness. If we pretend they don't need that, and if we think that they can just be treated like girls and turn into young men, we're mistaken, and I think that's where we've gone wrong. And so I think that's why this fatherlessness issue is so important. And when we went to see Lads Need Dads, one of the things that Joel does is just wrestle with these young boys. Because how is a boy supposed to learn how to have self-control over his natural ability to fight if he doesn't learn that by fighting someone who's older and stronger than him? That's how boys learn, isn't it? It's by wrestling people they can't actually hurt. If the first fight you have is a real one, and you stab someone, you're going to go to prison. But if you've been taught to control that natural aggression and harness it positively, you'll become a courageous young man. I don't know if any of you have watched the BBC series SAS Rogue Heroes. Has anyone seen that? That's what men can do. Yeah, so not all of it's good, but that's what men can do. And that's what we need to be able to say that men are good for. Final point, just was on BBC Politics Live earlier. The panel couldn't bring themselves to say that boys and girls were different and what was good about boys. And I think that's what we have to rediscover. What is especially good about boys? What is especially great about young men? And then how can we nurture that?
Thank you, Miriam. For anyone that wants to practice their wrestling, we will be arranging that in the car park after. Anyone who can beat Lawrence gets a pint. Okay, we are actually a man down at the moment. We're trying to work on Andy Burnham's microphone, so if that works, he'll pop up on the screen. But let's go to questions then. This is a really interesting topic. Lord Farmer, front row, as you should be, give us your question.
Well, thanks for producing this well overdue report, and thanks for all the contributions. It's so good to hear. You know, I do quite a lot of work in the prisons, and it's just interesting that yesterday there was a sort of proud announcement that there are going to be no young girls in prison anymore, because that was one of the aims of the government. However, you know, we have 3,500 women in prison. We have 86,000 men in prison. And there is a cultural double standards about how we look at men and how we look at women. The women are seen as victims. The men are seen by and large as perpetrators, abusers, aggressors, etc. And I think that's where this report and all of what we're doing here needs to get into the media and start changing that culture to say that actually 25% of the men in prison have been in care. How many haven't had fathers? You know, you can start with the prison. So they're a great place. They're a captive audience. You can use them and publicize it. So it's that cultural double standards that I would recommend that we actually look at. Who are the real victims? And the fact is, both of them are, men and women.
Yeah. Thank you. Any response to that, Miriam? Did we go into prison?
Completely agree. I suppose it's a historical fact that young men have always been more likely to end up committing crime. You know, that is unfortunately what happens when testosterone is fueled in an unhealthy rather than a healthy direction. But yes, certainly the kind of perpetrator-victim narrative really needs to be looked at. And I think particularly one of the areas we're looking at is pornography. And you know, some shocking statistics there about how many young women, 40% of young women have been choked during sex. But that's what's seen as the norm on pornography, and that's what boys see age 11 or 12. So you can't say that an 11-year-old boy, having seen that, is a perpetrator. He's a victim of the narrative that he's being shown. So I think we do need to reframe this. But I think, you know, those statistics just prove how much boys need their energies channeling in a positive way to learn self-discipline, to learn to be an asset to society. Because if they're not taught that and they're not disciplined, then, you know, that's what happens.
Okay, I think there's a question down here, and then we'll go over there after.
I could shout if you like.
Let's wait for the mic, just for our thousands of online viewers.
Hi there, Andy McNay, Member of Parliament for Rosendale and Darwin. First of all, I'd just like to welcome the report. I think, and brilliant effort by Charlie, by the way, that was fantastic. And to say that this is an issue that needs to be talked about. I'm glad it's being talked about. It needs to be talked about in the widest possible sense, and we need to now move forward to look into solutions. I could wax on a lot, but just to really ask specifically, how do you see this report feeding into the National Youth Strategy process, which is, consultation has started pretty well now, and it will go on through the next couple of months?
Okay, it's not like this government to run a consultation. I didn't even know there was one going on in this way. Iain, how will this feed into whatever consultation?
Well, I think the first thing is that that governments have to recognise that they have to set in a process that will be there after they've gone. And for ministers, they won't be able to take credit for change that will have happened on their watch. Because this is the problem. Ministers come and go at a rate that, frankly, you couldn't run a business on. So, you know, I was at the DW for 6 years. Those who followed me averaged 6 months in the department. You can't run anything. So there has to be a strong guidance through the system that accepts that this report is real and that what they're saying is this has to change. Otherwise, you will never get welfare bills down because you can't cut your way there. You have to reform and change it. And the main thing I would make about that is simply, therefore, I think it would be possible to set up cross-party consensus so that we shouldn't care who gets into government, but this area is all about reform and listening to the statistics. And that's the real point. And getting out there and understanding that it should no longer be taboo to talk about broken families and missing fathers. God knows, I've lost count how many of my colleagues that run a mile as soon as you say anything about family structure. Well, we mustn't say that. That's being critical. That's being judgmental. No, it's not. It's observing that there is a problem. You're not going to change that or get the men back into the families necessarily at that point. But in the meantime, you've got to look at how you can overcome the fatherlessness that is much of the cause of what goes on. And if you look at the boys in the gangs, the reason why gangs have accelerated to a degree, because many of these boys in dysfunctional backgrounds are looking for father figures, role models. Yep. They happen on the wrong one, which is a gangster who runs the gang, but it's a family, and it's a family that they suddenly feel part of. So you need to shift that to the positive role models. And I'm very happy to work with anybody on this to start this process of cross-party consensus. But please, let's get off the issue that there are taboo areas that we can't talk about because they embarrass us and we get attacked for them by certain people that will never believe a word of this.
Speaking of cross-party consensus, Mr. Burnham is joining us live, our very favourite mayor. I mean, we don't know that many, but you are the best one, Andy.
You say that to all the mayors,
Yeah,
Andy.
I know. I'm a cheap date. Andy, thank you for joining us. It's so good to see you. It'd be great to get your reflections on this report, this issue, but also hear a bit about what you're doing, particularly on the skills agenda, because we're all very excited about that. Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. It's a characteristically brave report, powerful report, as Miriam and others have said in the last few contributions from the Centre for Social Justice. And as Iain knows, I've always supported the Centre because it is about seeking political consensus on social disadvantage, isn't it? So, you know, proud to be with you all today supporting it. Good to see you, Lawrence, not seen you for a while. But, you know, I can already pick up in the room, there's, you know, a huge degree of buy-in, isn't there, to what we're discussing here, and rightly. So Miriam mentioned the NEAT figure, so let me come back to it, because if you want to put a number on the lost boys, it's big, isn't it? 15% of 16 to 24-year-olds not in education, employment or training. They were the last figures that came out last year. And in the North, we know it's higher than that. So, you know, massive, massive problem. I want to just turn, if I could, Andy, to some of the more structural causes of the high degree of alienation that some young men feel. I think it's a product of national policy under all governments, by the way, permanent policy. I'm not talking about any political direction that has led to the neglect of some people and some places. So let me take the place part of that first. The allocation of public investment has not been even across the UK. The Green Book has seen to that. So you have large parts of the Midlands and the North where people feel they're living in a place that doesn't offer opportunity. It speaks to neglect, and Levelling Up was an initiative to get after that. There've been many over the years, but that is still the reality. Britain is a very unequal place if you look at it. Second reason, and this compounds it, is under all governments, we've had an education system built around the university route.
Yep.
And that has led to large numbers of teenage boys reaching their middle teenage years, year 10, feeling that the system is disinvesting from them and isn't interested in them. And that is something that comes out very much through a survey we do of our year 10s in Greater Manchester called Be Well, the Be Well survey. 1 in 5 of our teenagers who we survey through that say they don't have hope for the future. Now, life was hard, wasn't it, in the 70s and 80s when many of us were growing up, but people had hope. I think this is a more modern phenomenon, that there are young people growing up and cannot have a sense of hope at that age. The latest Be Well survey, which isn't fully published yet, but I can just share one of the findings from it. A third of young people in Greater Manchester of that age saying they also don't have anyone to talk to. So if you combine a school system that isn't giving them that kind of sense of excitement and aspiration, and and nobody in their life close to them that can play that role, then you can see why we do have a real issue with the lost boys, as the report says. And congratulations to everyone who's been part in your team, Andy, in developing it. So the question is, what do we do about that? And let me just talk about the education side of it. There's lots more I could say about public investment and infrastructure, but I won't. I'll just deal with the education system side of it. We need an education system that's built on true parity between academic and technical, with a reformed curriculum, which is very much about the modern world. And I would even say a radically reformed curriculum. Our first go at this, Andy, as you know, is something called the Greater Manchester Baccalaureate, the MBAC, which is all about 2 equal routes at 14, and critically is linked to real opportunities in the Greater Manchester economy. We've developed a tool that allows young people here to look at our 7 priority sectors and find real jobs being advertised now and the salaries of those jobs, so they can start to see something to aim towards. And here we are fans of a reform of the last government, believe it or not, the T-level reform. Pleased to hear that, Miriam. We see in the T-level reform something that can speak to that parity, A-level, T-level. I wouldn't defund BTECs, by the way. I won't go into all of that debate now, because there will still be a need for those qualifications. But the T-level reform brought with it the 45-day work placement. And the experience of those work placements in Greater Manchester across a range of employers is they really help employers develop that relationship with young people. And for young people, it's long enough to feel like they belong in that particular workplace. And without going into all of the detail of the MBAC, let me just say where I want it to get to by 2030. I want the MBAC to get to a place by 2030 where there is a work placement of high quality for every young person in Greater Manchester who wants one. And at 14, they will be able to see all of those work placements at the end of our 7 sectoral gateways and start talking to teachers and parents or anyone else in their life about how they move towards those opportunities. It will require a change to the inspection framework for schools, because that inspection framework is geared around the English baccalaureate and the university route. So schools need to be allowed to move into this space. I think we do need to see a radical conclusion from the curriculum review that is underway, that is very much about the modern world and engaging all young people in the modern world, and not it being a backward-looking, knowledge-based curriculum. There's a role for that, but it doesn't work for everybody. I think that there needs to be change there. But city regions like the one I lead need to really then be able to commission our post-16 system to deliver the T-levels linked to those work placements that move people towards a better future. And that, Andy, is all about an education system that speaks to aspiration and direction for every single young person growing up in a city region like the one I lead. 2/3 of kids here do not go on the traditional university route. This isn't a sort of a thing that we would do as a sort of a nice to do. This is essential for us from a social point of view, but from an economic point of view as well, because employers want to access that young talent. Our failure to do it has disastrous consequences, in my view. Failure to have 2 equal routes. If you look at the figures, huge number of exclusions in recent years from secondary schools. That number has grown and grown over the years. If you then look at pupil referral units, 75 to 80% of young people in those units are boys. I don't believe we should have pupil referral units in the form that we've got them, because they just become a kind of next step to young people heading in a direction towards antisocial behaviour, even crime. The prison population, 96% male, 7 in 10 excluded from school. That's where it all starts. You can reach every young person, particularly in those middle teenage years. We are failing to do so. Therefore, we shouldn't be surprised at some of the outcomes that we are seeing. And my vision finally is to say this: if you come to our city now, people who've not been in recent times, you might be surprised at what you find, because what you find is a dynamic city that is changing quite dramatically. The skyline of Manchester speaks to huge change since the Manchester of the 80s and 70s when I was growing up. This is a vibrant place today. The problem is this: for the kids in the 10 boroughs around looking at that city centre, they can see the skyscrapers from their bedroom window, but they cannot see a path for themselves to those places, and they cannot imagine themselves working within those buildings. That's what we've got to change. And if we had an education system that was giving them, from the age of 14, a line of sight to the opportunities in our modern economy and a credible path towards those opportunities, I am not saying we would solve every issue that has been highlighted in the Lost Boys report, but we'd be making a bloody good start towards it. Thank you very much for listening, Andy.
Ooh, get him back down there.
Thanks, Andy. And once they make it into Manchester, they can really dream big about getting to Leeds. OK, let's go further questions. There's a question down here.
Oh, God, I can't follow that. Mine was really...
Let's wait for the mic. Here we go.
Mine was... Is it working?
Yeah.
Mine was anecdotal, really. I did an acting job in Bristol a couple of years ago, and I was in the centre of it, and I was completely devastated by how many homeless white boys there were everywhere. And I was there for a couple of months, and a few of us actors just started talking to them. And there was a common thread of an absent parent, often the father, a violent boyfriend, housing issues, and they'd completely fallen through the system. And what was also very striking is that, it sounds silly, but they were all utterly adorable. 16 to 24-year-olds, very eager to do something with their lives. You know that if they'd just had a tiny bit of leadership or someone outstretching a hand, they'd have done anything and been incredibly willing to work or contribute in some way. But there was no light for them and no path. And it's why I came today when Cara invited me. It's stayed with me ever since. So congratulations on all the work you're doing.
Thank you very much. I want to just ask about mobile phones. Sonia, your reflection in this has come up quite a bit when we've gone out there, and the kind of use of mobile phones in that way. What's your reflection on that and the tech and all of that that's going on, particularly for boys?
Well, it just disengages them, doesn't it? It doesn't give them real life relationships. I think a lot of boys and girls are really missing out on really fruitful relationships and social skills, particularly. I think, you know, as girls, as females, we are naturally relational. I'm not saying more than boys, but we are naturally more relational. We talk maybe a bit more than boys. So I think it's created quite a lot of isolation in young men, not being able to articulate themselves or even initiate a relationship if they want one. I know that when I was 17, you know, I think boys had a lot more action, if you know what I mean. They had a lot more girlfriends, and girls did, but...
All of us did.
No, wait, maybe not you, Andy, but, you know, I've got three sons, and 19, 21 and 24, and they've only ever had one girlfriend, but I remember being that age myself, and that definitely beat that number back in the day. But you know what I mean? I think it's really impacted how they
relationships,
relate.
That's totally.
You know, and obviously things like it's just such a distraction, particularly to their studies as well. Yeah. It's all consuming, and definitely get rid of them in schools. Yeah.
Very good. Lawrence, do you want us to come in?
Well, I echo Andy's points. I mean, he talks so much sense. We need you back down here in Westminster, really, Andy, to be honest with you, as much as we love Manchester as well. But just around just to throw some more statistics at you, that between that area of 14 and 17-year-old boys, the exclusion rates in this country have just gone up dramatically. I mean, 230 a week are currently being excluded, and, you know, 3 out of 4 of those are boys. And you know, we work at the front, you know, face of it. 65% of everyone in prison is excluded from school. So, and 66% of prisoners reoffend. So we've got this kind of virtuous circle, and boys are leading the charge. So never mind this government, the next government and the one after that have got a tsunami of problems that are not going to go away. They're just getting bigger and bigger. But, to Andy's point, we need to sit down and have a real long, hard look about what we think the education system prepares young boys for. Because the minute you're excluded, and people aren't excluded just because they're born bad. The problems start a lot earlier than that. Yeah. There is absolutely no way through that other than to go, 7 out of 10 end up in prison. So 1.5% of the entire excluded population end up with any qualifications whatsoever. So, we need programs. We need a real hard, long think about how we bring up young boys in this country. And the gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the ripple effect on all of us is huge. And never mind, 52-year-old bricklayers, AI is coming around the corner, right? And AI is going to replace a lot of people in this room. It can't replace skills that are required, like apprenticeships. And, these young kids, we offer 4 employability days to every young person we work with in exclusion. And 87% end up leaving PRUs and getting themselves a full-time job. So don't tell me it can't be done.
Thanks, Lois. If any CSJ staff are worried about their job and AI, do come see me at the end. We'll see how it goes. Iain wanted to just make a point on skills.
Andy up, and I agree with Lawrence. The reality is other countries do it better than us. We know that. So I don't know if you've had a chance to visit Holland, for example, which I always think had the best education system. The way they organise their education system is that in the schools, they have 2 routes through. One, they're different gradings, but what they actually say is everybody has to swap over where they are. So the highly academic have to also do all the stuff about learning about plumbing, about electrical laying. They don't do it up to exam level, but they have to do it. And those who are much more practical, their hands, and aren't going to go on to universities, are going to learn trades, they also have to be in the classroom learning as well. But the one thing is they're always on a pathway to a choice about what they want to do. And at the end of it, they are examined and they have diplomas or whatever that show they're on, they go on to do further. And interestingly, they're merged together in the school. So there's no kind of you're a failure because you can't go on to university. It's that everybody respects the person. And I asked him a question. I said, why do you put them all together like that? And he said, I used to teach in England, he said, and I remember I love England very much, I love you, but the thing is, he said, I recognise, and our people recognise that, we have very expensive bankers who do brilliantly and lots of investors and everything else now, and huge sums of money, and they're vital, etc. But the one thing we do know is when they go home, they have to have a house that's well built. If they switch the light on, they know that it's not going to blow up in their face. And they turn the bath on, somebody who was trained remembered to earth that thing so that it didn't get an electric shock. Simple facts. We like trained people to do things who are respected in society. The builder is the equal of the banker because both need each other. That's what our school system does. And I think that's what you're trying to get to, but it is exactly where they are already. And I just wish we would start learning from those who do it properly. And that gives a skill and a qualification to everybody they can be proud of.
Very good. Thank you. Question down here.
Thanks very much. It's Max Kennex at The Times. Andy, you mentioned the MBAC using the full ambition and power of devolution. Are you concerned at all about the current look and provisions of the schools bill going through Parliament? Do you think that anything in that bill clashes with the programme about skills you've just talked about?
Thank you. I'm not sure I'll dive into that Westminster controversy, but I will say something more broadly about where education has been in all of my time in Westminster politics. And all of the bills I ever encountered, it is still trapped in this thinking about the university route is the be-all and end-all. And it's that we've got to break out of. And I agree very much with what Iain just said, and also what Lawrence said before him. The statistics are right there in front of us. And it won't be school structures so much that change this. It's about culture change, isn't it? And valuing all young people equally. And yes, Iain, I absolutely agree. Right, it's not two rigid paths, academic and technical. It is about crossover, isn't it? And people may be switching from one to the other, but it's about speaking differently to young people as they are growing up and believing it when we say these are equal routes. We need all of these things. That point Iain just spoke to. We don't We haven't believed that in this country. There has been a snobbery in education for as long as I've been alive, that some things are better than others. And they're not, is the truth. You can go now on a technical path in Greater Manchester to a degree apprenticeship, a level 6 qualification, and you can get there without the debt. And that, to many young people here, would actually be a superior option to take. So we have to change this. No bill in Parliament is necessarily going to do that. If it had parity at the heart of it, it might begin to change the conversation. But that, for me, is the biggest issue we have. And I'm not talking about the politicians, but I am talking about a culture that still exists within the Department for Education. They are not, in my view, really opening up to what a modern economy like Greater Manchester needs. The thinking is too stuck in the past. It is too based around the old thinking that the university route is the be all and end all. And I would say that, if without getting drawn into detailed measures in a bill, that is the thing that needs to change. And the Department for Education needs to embrace devolution again. It's over-centralised everything in recent times. It needs to get back into a mindset that the answers lie within the communities where young people are growing up.
Very good. How long have we got left, Matthew? 3 minutes, enough for 3 questions. Let's go here and here, 2 questions. Make them as quick as we can, and then we can have 5 seconds each from the panellists.
Hi, directed at Miriam mainly. One of the areas where I think it's incontrovertible that boys are the target of predation and then social effects are downstream of girls is the porn industry. It's been mentioned in this report. Why is there no appetite in Westminster to tackle this? Last year we saw an expose where executives at Pornhub were admitting they were tailoring their content to 12-year-olds. Yeah. So they're targeting children, they're breaking the law. Why is no one doing anything about that?
I mean, it is a great question. I think it's very difficult to talk about pornography. I've done it in the House of Commons. It's not especially comfortable. It's also more difficult for men to talk about, obviously. There is actually the porn review that's just been published last week that was commissioned by the last government that's actually got some very, very, I think, good suggestions about how to tackle this. But you're absolutely right. I think that, Westminster just does not understand quite how destructive pornography is. And think back to the kind of porno magazines that might have been around when some of us in this room were growing up. What's online now bears absolutely no resemblance to that at all. It's almost entirely violent. Pornhub's been called a crime scene. It is. It's videos of actual rapes and actual violence. And I think the idea that this is what our children, particularly our young men, are being brought up on, and the impact that has in terms of what they think is normal, what they think is normal sexual behaviour, what they think women actually want. The downstream effects of that in terms of relationship formation, marriage, children, family are going to be absolutely catastrophic. And I think the other thing is that the conservative side of politics particularly is allergic to is the idea of banning anything. And yet really, pornography is so destructive to children. What's the alternative? We've banned alcohol for under 18s, we've banned cigarettes for blooming everybody. We don't let 17-year-olds drive a car because we recognise there's a difference between adults and children. And we don't give children freedom. That's the whole point, because they are not developmentally able to exercise it in a way that keeps them safe. So I think the only answer is to actually stop children from watching pornography. You're never going to stop 100% of children from watching pornography, but you absolutely can stop 9-year-olds accidentally finding it on an iPad. And I think that's what we've got to do. But it's hard to talk about, and I think that's why nothing's being done.
Okay, thank you. Very last question.
Martina Bett from The Sun. I was just interested in something that was one of the slides and mentioned in the report, and that is that the use of AI chatbots is particularly prevalent with young men. And that it's said that AI can actually be quite horrible to people if it's used as a therapy service. Can we actually do anything about it? Because surely that's just an issue that is going to become more widened as the technology picks up. I just wanted to hear what your thoughts were on this.
Probably best for you to take that one, Miriam.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, it's frightening. I can't remember, Luke, the statistic of how many young men has actually engaged with an AI girlfriend, but was it 40%? Anyway, it's in the report somewhere. But I think it's, again, one of these things where the kind of Westminster liberal tendency is to say, oh, we can solve this education. I think we idolise education too much, actually. Children just aren't developmentally able to engage safely with AI, with pornography, with social media. And actually the answer is to just say this kind of technology, that the internet in your pocket is not safe for children. And, you know, good luck using it when you're over 18, to be honest, but it's not suitable for children, and we just need to stop kids having smartphones, because if you don't have that device in your pocket 24 hours a day, there's a limit to what you can do on a family computer. And I think that's where it's got so dangerous. But again, unlike other countries in the world, we've become very resistant to talk about the idea of preventing children from having certain freedoms. But I think that's wrong. I think we just need to recognise that adults and children are different, just like boys and girls are different. These are things that have been known for hundreds of years. We seem to have conveniently forgotten in the last 20, but we just need to rediscover it again.
Very good. OK, that draws it to a close, but I just want to give thank you to all the panellists. I want to just give Iain the chance to say a few final words.
Well, look, I'm not going to get up. I want to thank Andy, Charlie as well, and the CSJ for braving this again for the second time round and coming up with the figures that should startle us and worry us, and particularly in Westminster. I agree with Andy on that Westminster has got to look now about giving people who know what to do greater responsibility for taking it on. This report, though, should act as a screaming signal to my colleagues in Westminster that we have successfully managed to ignore this single problem that is staring us in the face. And I have to say thank you to the CSJ. I know I'm involved with the CSJ as chairman, but I want to particularly thank Andy because it's bold leadership that has got us to this place, and thank you very much indeed, and the whole of the CSJ.
Brilliant. Well, that's it. Andy, thanks so much for joining us. And I think there's cups of tea around the corner and pints even further around the corner. Thank you very much.
Well done.